August is just around the corner, meaning that we are awaiting announcements from Fulton County District Attorney Bonnie Willis regarding her long-running investigation into alleged 2020 election interference from former President Donald Trump. I'm Tim Darnell, joined by producer Maria Moreau here in our Midtown Atlanta studios here on Atlanta News First and our digital streaming desk, bringing you all the latest headlines in this week's edition of Political Update. In a very late developing bit of news, late Tuesday night, Rudy Giuliani, former New York City mayor and who made his reputation not only as a fearless federal prosecutor, but also mayor of New York City during the 9/11 terror attacks, who has recently been serving as a personal attorney for former President Donald Trump, admitted that he has made false statements against two Fulton County election workers in the chaotic aftermath of the 2020 presidential election here in Fulton County. Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss are the two Fulton County election workers in question, and they have a long-running defamation lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani. As I said, what's known as America's mayor. Giuliani was acting as personal attorney for the former president as he continued to make allegations regarding election interference, election malfeasance in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. In another incident regarding former President Trump, his attorneys here in Atlanta last week made another attempt to disqualify Fulton DA Bonnie Willis from further investigation and made another attempt to quash the special grand jury report, whose authors finished up their work earlier this year and whose potential indictments we are potentially awaiting during the coming month of August. Trump's Atlanta-based attorneys are accusing DA Willis of raising money for her re-election campaign on the back of her investigation into alleged 2020 election tampering from the former president. You recall Donald Trump made a now famous phone call in early January 2021 to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger that has really become the basis for Willis's investigation. Here's a portion of that call.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes.
2 weeks ago, the Georgia State Supreme Court rejected Trump's latest attempts from his attorneys to disqualify the DA and to quash the grand jury report. So we'll be following to see whether or not this latest attempt made last Thursday is successful. Moving closer to Georgia, in one of the most interesting controversies sweeping the nation's political and social and cultural scene, country music superstar Jason Aldean has a Billboard-topping country hit, Try That in a Small Town. It has ignited a wave of controversy across the nation as far as whether or not the song incites vigilantism or is racially or culturally or socially insensitive. But the country music superstar picked up a major bit of support last week from Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who tweeted his support for the song, and Jones has been joined by other conservative Republican governors, lieutenant governors across the nation in lending their support to Jason Aldean and his #1 single, Try That in a Small Town. Also here in Georgia, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger's office announced last week that it is purging Georgia's voter rolls of about 200,000 perhaps inactive voters from its voting rolls. Now, this is a move that is required by federal law over every 2 years. And about 2% of Georgia's 6 million registered voters are now listed as inactive and are at risk of being removed from the state's voting lists. County election offices are now sending out letters for anyone who is on that list. So if you think that you have been registered as inactive, be sure to check your mailbox and ensure that you're ready to vote in next year's general election. Speaking of 2024, 2 weeks ago, State Representative Misha Maynor made shockwaves across the Georgia and national political landscape when she announced she is leaving the Democratic Party to join the Republican Party. Maynor cited the role of school choice as the primary reason she is switching her political allegiances. Now, earlier this week, I had an interview with Nathan Cunneen, who is with the American Federation for Children, on the role of school choice and its political implications ahead of next year's elections. Here is that interview. The defection of State Representative Misha Maynor from the Democratic Party that happened a couple of weeks ago is still causing shockwaves throughout the political landscape here in Georgia. And Nathan Cunneen, you're a communication strategist for the American Federation for Children. And one of the reasons I really wanted to hear your observations about what has happened here, school choice was an issue that State Representative Maynor cited as a reason for her switch to the Republican Party. When you heard about this, what was your reaction?
Right. Well, I've actually been paying attention to Representative Maynor since back in March when she first came out in support of school choice. Representative Maynor was the only Democrat to vote yes on a school choice bill that would have allowed Georgia students attending the worst 25% of public schools in the state to access a different education. And she issued a strong statement afterwards because her Democrat Party colleagues, she was reviled. I mean, they threatened her with a primary challenge. They came down on her for betraying the party. And now, 3 or 4 months later, that she is now officially switched to the Republican Party, her message has been very clear. This was not a political decision. This was a moral one. She's talked to the people in her district. New polling shows that 66% of Democrats support school choice. Her constituents want this, especially the ones that are stuck in low-performing schools. And I think it was an incredibly brave thing to witness these last 4 months as we've seen her stand with her people, her constituents, over a political party.
Here in Georgia, where we have a sarcastic response when we talk about the state's SAT performance standards and other performance testing. And it's just, thank heavens that there are other states like Alabama and Mississippi who, for years ranked as low as Georgia, well in the bottom, I would say, 5 worst performing states in the nation. And from an educational standpoint, why is this such a controversial issue?
Right. I couldn't tell you. For me, just like Representative Maynor, school choice is a moral issue. I actually personally benefited from a school choice scholarship when I was growing up. And now that I work, advocating for school choice full time, I've often asked that question of how could this be controversial? At the end of the day, it's about making sure that every family has a choice when it comes to their education. The quality of your learning should not be determined based on your zip code. And I think, by and large, for the majority of Americans, it's understood that way. 71% of Americans support school choice, and that number has remained around 70% poll after poll after poll. It's these hyper-political parties that make this into a divisive issue. And the reason they're in Georgia is because the Democratic Party is allying with their teachers union allies instead of their constituents. And I will add one more point here, and we would do well to remember. The reason that Georgia didn't pass school choice this year was because 16 Republicans refused to support students. School choice is part of the Republican platform, and yet 16 of them voted against the school choice proposal earlier this year. And I think Representative Maynor switching parties should be a massive wake-up call to Republicans. Here is this woman representing a mostly blue district in Atlanta, and she is willing to put her neck on the line and switch parties in order to stand up for her families in her district. And I think that that should be a massive wake-up call for Republicans who weren't willing to do the same thing just a couple months ago.
Are there any public funding issues involved in the issue of school choice? Are publicly funded vouchers part of the equation? Or, I mean, I'm trying to think of objections that I've heard from the Republican Party regarding the issue of school choice, and sometimes there are taxpayer funded vouchers that are involved. Clarify that issue for us.
Well, the purpose of an education dollar is to educate kids. It's not to support any particular system or any particular school. A lot of the way that this discourse goes sometimes is it ends up focusing more on the schools than on the benefit of each individual student. School choice completely rejects that notion. Is, in my mind, the purpose of every education dollar is for that kid to get the best quality education possible. And that very often means allowing that student to access the provider that meets their individual needs. I support public schools, I support charter schools, I support private schools. You know, homeschooling has become incredibly popular after the pandemic. I think there should be no limitations on what a student needs in order to get the most out of their education. And I think public funds, education dollars should be utilized in a way that gives families that freedom.
Are there any states in the nation that really, to your mind and to your organization, the American Federation for Children's viewpoint, offer best of everything education policy in terms of school choice? Is there any state in the nation that you would love to see Georgia model its system out or from?
I would love to see there might be some UGA fans watching this, but I would love
Sure.
Florida follow in the direction of Florida, which was my home state. Florida has long led the nation on school choice policies. As of last year, every single family in the state of Florida has access to education savings accounts if they want to. That's something that I think Georgia should seek to emulate. Florida has seen a rapid improvement in educational outcomes over the last decade or so. In the early 2000s, when I was first using my school choice scholarships, Florida was ranked near the bottom in K through 12 education. And today they are within the top 3 in the nation on all 4 of the core NAEP scores. Georgia cannot boast that, unfortunately. And I would love to see the day where that was not true anymore. I'd love to see Georgia near the top of the national rankings in the future.
What does your organization, the American Federation for Children, do? What do you advocate?
So we advocate for school choice policies. We believe that all families, but especially lower income families, deserve to choose their education and not have their education determined by their zip code. And there's elements to that statement that potentially not everyone realizes it. We have a compulsory education system in this country, which means you have to go to school. And if you are an upper income family, you can move into the school district of your choice. You can access school choice through the housing market. Maybe you take your child and you pay for private school out of pocket. But those two opportunities, by and large, remain out of reach for many low income families. I was one of them. My parents had no chance of affording private school. And yet when I began to struggle in my public school, the only reason we were able to access alternatives was because of a school choice scholarship. And I believe firmly that every student in the country, every student in Georgia deserves that exact same opportunity. And the American Federation for Children works across the country to make that a reality.
You mentioned school choice scholarships. The mere name scholar, or the phrase scholarships, imply some sort of financial assistance.
Right.
Where does that money come from? Who pays for it?
Right. So right now in Georgia, you have a tax credit scholarship program in which the scholarships are funded via private donations, which is excellent. Tax credit programs have been very popular. That's what I used when I was using school choice in Florida. But ultimately, the purest form of school choice and the goal of the education system should be for education dollars to follow the students directly. So right now, every student is allocated a per pupil allocation to attend school. The national average is about $16,000 per student. And I believe that every penny of those dollars should follow students to the school of their choice. The way that this works currently, like right there in Georgia, is when a student leaves their residentially assigned public school to use the tax credit scholarship, the school is keeping portions of their money, and they don't have to educate that student any longer. In my opinion, I think education dollars should be following students to the schools that they choose and not just funneling into any particular school system.
From a purely logistic standpoint, let's say I'm a parent in an economically depressed community that has a school that is just totally run down and decrepit and consistently fails its students. Let's say I get a school choice scholarship, but that school is that I want to send my child to is 10 miles away, where the other one is maybe right around the corner or a publicly funded bus ride.
Right.
How do I get my child to that school that I want him or her to go to without drastically adjusting my work schedule, my time to work schedule? From a logistics standpoint, how does that work?
It's a really great question, and one that's becoming more and more popular. Several states around the country have attempted to address this by including transportation in the school choice legislation. So, for instance, education savings accounts are a school choice option that are becoming increasingly more popular. Education savings accounts allow families to purchase private school tuition, but also things like tutoring or supplemental services or curriculum, and in several cases, transportation. So several states are allowing families to use these school choice dollars to access transportation to make up for some of that potential discrepancy. I'll also note that we should never underestimate what parents are willing to do for their kids and for their kids' education. I think that this is a very relevant concern. I personally am very passionate about creating more transportation and logistical options to help this process. But ultimately, I think, that shouldn't be a reason to withhold school choice from some of these economically depressed families who are crying out for it. That situation may very well be arised, and I think including transportation in the ESAs is one way to address it, but I'm happy that those families are having those opportunities regardless.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that the Democratic Party and Georgia Democratic Party, as well as 16 Republicans who voted or failed to approve the school choice measure. But you mentioned the support from the American Federation of Teachers, one of the largest unions and most influential unions here in Georgia. There have been many instances of elected officials who advocated policies that were kind of not in line with the AFT. Why do you think teachers unions such as the American Federation of Teachers are against this issue?
Well, first of all, I'll note that in my mind, there's a difference between the political operatives of the teachers' unions and the teachers who are in their classrooms every day trying to serve students. Mm-hmm. I have no intention of trying to villainize teachers. I think by and large, teachers are passionate about educating their students, and they're trapped in a system that is consistently letting them down. When it comes to the teachers' unions, they oppose school choice because it directly threatens their monopoly. Right now, every student that they can keep in their school represents a dollar figure for them. And part of that is flowing directly into the union's coffers. And I think one of the ways that this is telling is if you watch the way that teachers unions discuss school choice, they always have the immediate assumption that if students are given a school choice option, then those students are automatically going to take it. And I always ask them to take a step back and say, why is your immediate assumption that if families had a choice, they would leave their public schools? What does that tell you about the schools that they might be wanting to leave? And I'm a believer in public schools. I am very happy when I hear great public school stories. Unfortunately, they're becoming rarer and rarer, but the teachers unions are trying to oppose school choice because they know families want it, and they know keeping school choice out of their hands is the only way to keep these students locked into their schools based on zip code.
But aren't teachers who might be employed at other institutions that are not publicly funded? Let's say there are teachers in private schools or in alternative schools. Are they not eligible to become members of a teachers union, or are teachers unions such as the American Federation of Teachers, are they exclusively composed of public school teachers only?
I actually don't know the answer to that question nationally or in Georgia. I will say I haven't heard of instances where private school teachers were joining the AFT. That would strike me as very irregular, but I'm afraid I can't say factually whether or not that's permitted. I will say, just on the element of teachers and teachers in alternative schools, I think one of the things that is too often not discussed is how beneficial school choice is to teachers, and especially can be to teachers. We have academic evidence. There are 6 studies that show that when school choice is introduced into the marketplace, teacher salaries increase because competition for the best teachers becomes more intense. I also think that there is a bureaucratic toll on teachers that is taken when you have this one-size-fits-all system. We've seen evidence in places like Miami-Dade County in Florida where introducing school choice led to a more flexible and teacher-focused school district. And I think that that's desirable to many teachers.
Does the issue of school choice also involve educational curriculum? We've seen from a curriculum standpoint, there are some cultural issues going on when parents object to what kids are being taught in public schools. Does the issue of curriculum play into the issue of school choice?
I think they're moderately aligned in the sense that, school choice is powerful because it gives families the option to choose what they want for their individual kids. We are witnessing these sort of curriculum battles around the country, and some states are banning this and some states are banning that. And it's all essentially a form of political whack-a-mole where we are alienating people who have different values and trying to force everyone into this one-size-fits-all mold for education. School choice rejects that notion and says, hey, look, every single family should have the freedom to choose what education works for them and their kids. And there's a lot of reasons why that might differ. Some parents have different views on school safety. Some parents have different views on what curriculum their child should be learning. All of those things are especially relevant in this day and age. And I think school choice offers the solution to that problem, in that families can have the freedom to choose what they want instead of being forced into something that they don't.
Well, the issue of school choice was the deciding factor in the recent announcement by State Representative Misha Maynor to switch from the Democratic to the Republican Party. We are wrapping up this week's edition of Political Update with Nathan Cunneen, communication strategist for the American Federation for Children, talking about school choice. Final thoughts on the issue of school choice and the importance of that issue here in Georgia.
We should remember that school choice is not us versus them. It's not public versus private school. School choice is about putting students first, and there are 26 academic studies that show that when school choice increases, the quality of nearby public schools get better also. School choice is a tide that lifts all boats, and it's what we should do for Georgia students and for students around the country.
Well, we'll continue to follow this issue not only through the rest of the year, but also through the next legislative session, reconvening in January. Thanks to Nathan Cunneen from the American Federation for Children. Thanks to all of you for watching this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First.